To me, it seems much bigger actually, from what I remember. And it was really friendly, you know, a real companionship.
I'm Andrew Whitmarsh and I'm the curator of the D-Day story in Portsmouth. Working on the LCT project, in some ways, is the next great opportunity for our museum. The reason why landing craft were used on D-Day was because getting off the landing craft and getting off the beach as quickly as possible was really key. A normal boat just isn't really designed for landing people on a beach. So landing craft have one of their special features is they have a ramp at the front. So when this is let down, the troops on board can drive or run out onto the beach, and it's much, much quicker. We're working on this project in partnership with the National Museum of the Royal Navy, who actually own LCT 7074 and have taken the lead on securing the funding.
So by 2009, LCT 7074 was moored up in the River Mersey with no hope for her future, really. Then by 2013, she actually became fully submerged in the river there. The museum was able to move LCT 7074 from Liverpool over a 2-day salvage operation. Thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, we have been able to undertake conservation work on LCT 7074. 7074 is actually the only known surviving landing craft tank that took part in the D-Day landings. But actually, she's much more than just one artefact. She interconnects lots of different stories.
The LCT is a part of our local and regional history, but also it's part of our national history. LCT 7074 had all these connections with many other places in the UK, and it's really great that they're also part of the project. Really, it reflects the history.
So we found out about this project and we were asked whether we'd like to be involved, and we thought it was a fantastic idea. I work for Tyne and Wear Archives and Museums. I'm the museum manager in North and South Tyneside. So the South Tyneside part covers Hebburn, where Hawthorne Leslie's, the shipyard that built the landing craft, was. We approached Jarrow and Hebburn History Society and asked them if they would like to get involved with the project, and they were delighted to.
I first got involved when Jeff got in touch with me to see if any of the members had any knowledge about it. And we did a fair bit digging, and we got photographs and we learned a bit about them. And I knew about the landing craft because I have a half-brother who was an able seaman, Royal Navy in the war, and he was assigned to the landing craft. And I remember me as a small child telling my dad, when the soldiers were getting transported, they were violently seasick. They had a terrible crossing, and as soon as they let the doors down for them to go out chest deep in the water, they were just all shot out. And he said on returning back, he was taking them to their death, and he felt dreadful about it because he was driving them, knowing what was happening to them.
Today's been really exciting, and we've come to the archives at Discovery Museum in Newcastle, and we had a general idea about what we'd be looking at, but I hadn't seen any of the documents that were revealed today, and we've found a lot of things that we weren't expecting to find.
74, I think.
Oh, there it is, 1704.
Well, we've been having a look at what archives the Tyne and Wear Museum had, and we found out quite a bit about the tank landing craft. We found out how much it cost each trade, and we found it with dimensions and when it was launched and what berth it was on.
Well, I served an apprenticeship in a shipyard, and I've had a lifelong interest in ships. And I did work in Hawthorne Leslie's for a while. In fact, I worked in almost all of the shipyards because we were all short-term jobs. When the ship was finished, you were out, until the next one came.
My brother, who was in the army, and he used to tell the story of going over to crossing the channel in a landing craft, and his lorry was the second lorry on the landing craft. There was one in front of him, and when they reached the shore, the landing craft went onto the beach and they lowered the ramp, but the end of the ramp was still in water. They were instructed to rev and get themselves up the beach as quickly as possible. The fellow in front of my brother, He went off the ramp, and his lorry disappeared straight away into a hole which they mustn't have been able to see from the surface. And the landing craft, within minutes, they just pulled the landing craft off, moved it along the beach, went in again, put the ramp down. It was my brother's turn. And I remember him telling me that he was very apprehensive. But anyway, he revved up again and shot off the landing craft and up the beach. Fortunately, everything went well for him, and he survived the full length of the full time of the war.
Oh, I think it's something that should never be forgotten.
God, yeah,
You know, we should be celebrating.
It's part of our history.
Yeah,
that's right. It's part of our history.
So when LCT 7074 was completed and delivered on 7th of April 1944, it was then sailed down the coast to East Anglia, ready for training of the men in preparation for the D-Day landings.
In the Great Yarmouth area, the crew of LCT 7074 would be practicing the key things that normally a ship, a Royal Navy vessel has to do is not go aground. That's one of the main sort of things that you need to avoid. And obviously in the landing craft, that's exactly what you want to do. The next sort of stage really in the history of LCT 7074 was the LCT and the flotilla went down to the Felixstowe area and loaded up the troops, the tanks from 7th Armoured Division.
Norfolk Museum Service were approached by Portsmouth Museums to trace the East Anglian remit of the project, and so I've been working from the Time and Tide Museum in Great Yarmouth, but working with different organisations all over both Norfolk and Suffolk. So we are currently at Felixstowe Museum. Just outside the museum is the area where the embarkment yard would have been, where LCT 7074 would have loaded on its tanks. The tanks would have come along the road leading up to the museum, which was built specifically for D-Day. It would have been a very busy time where all these tanks were being loaded onto these craft in the preparation for advancing for D-Day.
We've used the internet a lot to look for things.
The biggest problem we've had is actually finding anything in the newspapers. We thought the local newspapers, we thought we'd get all sorts of information, but because of the war and the news blackout, that's just been a bit of
all top secret and then, wasn't
it? A dead end, hasn't it?
You know.
For me, it's important to remember because unfortunately the people who are actually there at the time, they're getting older and they're not going to be with us forever, so keeping the memory alive and what they did as a whole to protect us from the Nazis, I guess.
Personally, I lost my father in the World War II, but that was in the Far East, not here. When looking for things on the internet, it's surprising how, like, my father's piece can come into, although it's nothing to do with landing craft, little snips that people have said something else, and you think, oh, well, my dad was there.
Currently we're in St Michael's Church in the village of Wolverstone, and it's on the estate of what was Wolverstone Hall, and it's the site where the commanding officer of LCT 7074 received his final briefing for the D-Day landings. Today we are with Simon Pearce.
I've lived in the village for 40 years. During the war, troops were based here. Some were involved in Operation Quicksilver, which was an operation of subterfuge and deceit. Landing craft were made at night under the cover of darkness and then floated out onto the river so that they would appear the next day. The gunners who were on the anti-aircraft guns were asked to fire and miss on the Germans passing over so that they were actually allowed to take photographs of what was in the river below. We have a testimony from Dame Marion Kettlewell, and she was a wren who was working at Wolverstone during this period.
But I can remember well, we had a party the night before they were supposed to go, and we woke up, they were still there in the morning. Remember, everything was delayed because of weather. And I went out one early morning to watch them all go. It was quite a sight.
So The crew of LCT 7074 was quite small. We know the names of the two officers, so Sub-Lieutenant John Baggett was the commanding officer, so he was in charge, and Sub-Lieutenant Philip Stevens was his second in command. So as LCT 7074 and the rest of the flotilla crossed the channel, there would be enormous numbers of ships and landing craft heading over. They weren't right in the very first waves because their troops were scheduled to land a little bit later on, so there would have been a lot of other ships that would have gone ahead of them, but basically everywhere they looked as they crossed the channel, the crew and the troops on board, there'd have been ships all over the place. There'd have been lots of aircraft flying overhead. Everyone on board would have known that this was a really major operation happening. LCT 7074 landed its tanks on Gold Beach early on the 7th of June, so that was the day after D-Day, the 6th of June. There wouldn't have been fighting immediately in the area of the beach because by that stage the British forces at Gold Beach had advanced a little way inland, but the front line wasn't that far away, so it would have very much felt like a war zone. The Sub-Lieutenant Philip Stevens, who was the second in command of the LCT, wrote in his diary what happened on the 9th of June. So he writes, "Limped into Southampton and slept for the first time in 4 days." So Southampton was the first point that they came back to in the UK after those initial landings.
So the project, we were approached by D-Day Story Museum to look into LCT 7074's journey and its connection to Southampton. So we have quite an extensive collection in our archive of sort of diaries, maps, photographs. So the volunteers were really focusing on the geography and the place and the feeling of Southampton during 1944.
My name's Ian and I work in Southampton Docks in front of house. I researched Southampton Docks' role in D-Day. The docks were very important in accepting lease-lend cargo from the United States. They were also very important with fleets of landing craft, and they look quite a sight.
I'd spent the last 40 years nursing, so I wanted to look at hospital life in 1944. On June the 6th, someone dashed into our room and gave us the shock news. A reliable source on the wireless had broadcast that we had made a landing on the Normandy coast. Some wards had to be cleared at once in readiness for wounded troops. Later that afternoon, I saw the first soldiers arriving. They were in stained battle dress, covered with grey army blankets, with huge yellow labels attached to them, stating that the new wonder drug penicillin had been given.
Volunteering in a project like this has really stimulated my interest in history and given me the chance to do research and discover the connections between my local city and the D-Day.
LCT 7074 left the Royal Navy in 1948, and then the next stage in its career change, you could say, was being used as a nightclub. So some people in the Liverpool area still remember going on board the LCT as a nightclub.
My name's Poppy Lim and I am the oral historian lead on this project in Liverpool. Being part of a national project was exciting because we wanted to fit in with what everybody was doing, but also try and do something a bit different and link it to our expertise. We recorded 6 oral histories for the project, and our first was with Freya. Freya's dad was George Evans, who owned the Landfall during its time in Liverpool as a nightclub. George is mentioned in several of our oral histories and is a big character in the story.
My name's Freya Evans-Swagger, and my dad used to own 7074, also called the Landfall in those days, where he ran it as a swinging 70s night spot. It's my understanding he started it off in 1968 when he started a catering company that took over the catering franchise of it when it was still owned by the Master Mariners Club of Great Britain. And then shortly after that, I think he realised it was failing slightly because the clientele was getting older and older. Knowing my dad, he probably took one look at it and went, I can do better. Judging by the photographs, people seem to be having a great time. But personally, seeing the kitchen during the daytime, I'm not saying I wouldn't have eaten there, but food wasn't as glamorous as it was made out to be. I can remember in the kitchen seeing huge big tins of instant asparagus soup powder, and it was like, cream of asparagus soup, madam, and I knew it just came out of a big old tin. And I do remember buttering at home buttering mounds and mounds of bread for a big event with a tub of margarine that had been melted, cheap margarine that had been melted down, and dipping a brush into it and painting the bread. But people seem to like it. I think glamour is something, you know, once you turn the lights down and you go in somewhere a bit different, like a tank landing craft, maybe you put all that aside and think it's really impressive. People seem to like it. It's funny, actually, it didn't really emphasise the Second World War aspect of it at all. It was more that it was just on a boat, and that was really unusual. I'm picking up now that it was actually after my dad finished, which was 1976, 1978, I'm not entirely sure, that it actually did run as a nightclub for a while after that. And it's my understanding that it did go down the tubes a little bit, and a bit of a reputation as being a slightly dodgy place, which again does seem disrespectful. But maybe that's more our modern attitudes now. Well, I'm going, with my husband, going down to Portsmouth next week. I think even though it's going to look radically different, I'm just still so excited about seeing it.
Walter Joseph Beale, LCT 836. I think there were 12 altogether, 2 officers and 10 men. We had what they called a fanny on board, which had soup in constantly, and that used to simmer all the time we were on the way to France and back. It was really beautiful if it's a cold, really cold day. On the way back we played football in the tank deck. Yes, it seems bigger to me, but I'm probably a bit smaller than I was in those days.
My name, Charles Henry Warwick, 787, and looked after the ballast of the ship in the engine room. I have some good memories and some bad memories as well. But when it's all finished, I like to come back and have a look at it then.
Well, somebody just said it's a rare thing to get to visit your past, to visit your childhood. It's like being in a time machine. The boat's still there for me, and it's just wonderful to see this combination of incredibly poignant machinery of war and the sort of softness of the 70s childhood. It's very affecting. I've been very touched by it, and also thought about how much my dad would love this as well.
D-Day took an effort across the whole of the UK. It would be amazing that there would be an actual landing craft that was really there on the 6th of June off the coast of Normandy.
I hope that visitors to LCT 7074 will take away a greater understanding of what landing craft tank did during D-Day, how the crew operated her, and also about the people that interacted with her throughout her long history.